God Almighty, son. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to True Crime Loser. How you doing? I hope you're doing well. All right, so let's get into this. Chris Watts' jailhouse interview was released yesterday, and I was pretty surprised on how long it was and how unedited it was. I think watching the Dr. Phil episode, that was just so edited and stretched out for commercials and on a weird dinner set where everyone's in suits being like, what did she say? And after the Dr. Phil, I felt so weird. And then after listening yesterday, I felt weird, but more in just a way of like, yeah, well, it's a horrible situation. But I appreciated that they gave us most of the interview. I don't know how much was cut out, if any. It seemed like the end was a little bit cut out, but it started at the beginning and then, went for a while. And just overall, I thought Chris sounded pretty good. He sounded content in his prison life, and that might not stay. He's only been in there a couple months, and I'm sure he's going to have a lot of nights of just crying, being like, this is what I have to do forever. I think he'll be okay with it at times and then just be like, I never get to go outside again. Cool. But he sounded content and he sounded like a normal. Here's the thing is I think the reason Chris Watts is so fascinating for the entire world is he's the most bizarre, normal guy I think any of us will ever come across. 98% of the interview, he just sounds like a nice guy. And then there's the few little parts that it's like, whoa, like you have a lizard face, Chris. Like I joke about that a lot, but there were times in the interview where it's like, all right, this is such just a normal guy. And then he'll say something about, about what he did, and it's like, what? All right. So the whole interview, this is mostly just the first hour that I'm going to talk about today, but the whole interview from Chris kind of had this vibe of, this is what happens when you bottle up your emotions. I bottled them up for too long, and Shanann was Shanann, and you like it was a normal thing. Like if you bottle it up too long, you're gonna annihilate your family, which just isn't the case. And there's another feeling kind of throughout the whole thing is like this was like all of these things are working against me, Chris, all these things are working against me. And it was moving towards murder. I just wish something could have happened to like pull it off the trajectory of this happening. Graham and Tammy, they want him to keep talking. That's their whole goal in this thing, is just keep talking. That's all the laughing. That's all of the just encouraging of like, yeah, no, that's normal. Good for you. And so they allow Chris kind of indulge in these, like it was going towards this direction. And I just wish something would have happened to pull me out of, the inevitability of doing this. And when really, if you think about it, it's like, what was this big? At one point, they used the metaphor of it's like a big soup of all of this thing. Shanann and Cindy get into a fight, and Shanann now hates Chris's parents, and the thing with Nikki and the affair, and not being home for a month, and seeing pictures of it, and he's like, it's this soup of all these things that were just going so bad, and that were pushing me, barreling me towards what happened. And I just wish that I would have been home to see a picture of my family to remind me. And it's like, whoa, woo, Chris, Lizard Boy, hi, how's it going? I know that Graham and Tammy are pretending to be your friend right now because they want you to keep rambling, but what the hell are you fucking talking about? In-laws hating a significant other is about as normal as it gets. Having an over-controlling spouse that ends up not working years into the marriage is about as normal as it gets. Sadly, affairs are very, very normal. And, the thing about that's not normal is the murders at the end of those three things. This wasn't some bad luck soup that Chris was dealt in life. But the whole kind of interview had this vibe of like, God, like so many things were just like pointing towards this. And all right, you guys get it, but let's get into this. I liked Graham's opening where he said, frankly, we can't get over this. Chris, we've all been just saying to ourselves, this didn't make sense. And I think that goes back to the 98% normal guy, 2% lizard face. And Graham and Tammy, they work in the FBI, so I think they have to have these official diagnoses. So they might not ever understand Chris as good as we can, because I can just be like, he's 98% normal and then 2% lizard personality. And that makes quite a bit of sense to me. And the FBI can't do that. They can't put officially in the chart, like, this dude is a reptile, like, some of the time. But I liked Graham's opening saying, the reason we're here, you're not in any more trouble. And I couldn't help but laugh at that, because it's like, he's in all the trouble. You can't be in more trouble once you're in all the trouble. There's nothing that Chris could do to be in more trouble. And then I liked that they came out to talk to him too, as a goal to how can we be better at getting people to talk. Way later in the interview, Chris straight up tells Tammy, like, if you wouldn't have put the idea in my head that Shanann hurt the kids, I wouldn't have said it. And you could tell that Tammy didn't want to hear that. And she was like, well, you weren't giving me anything. Like, I pictured Graham and the other guy looking at Tammy and being like, told you, Tammy. And her being like, all right, you're not in trouble. We're all just here. And, they're being very friendly. Because, again, I think we take it for granted that Chris just sat down and spilled all this stuff. A lot of people would just either not talk or just keep lying, even though I think he probably did lie a little bit. But anyway, so Tammy's laughing at everything he says. Chris, you're so funny. And a bunch of people were getting mad in the comments of the, excuse me, of the video I was watching, being like, I know they're just doing their jobs, but they shouldn't be nice to Chris. And it's like, well, we want him to talk, okay? You gotta just get past the fact that they're laughing at all his jokes. We just want him to keep going. All right, then he talks about how this prison was much, much better for him than the prison in Colorado, because everybody in Colorado wanted to kill himself and was banging on the walls all night. And this prison, just everyone treats him better. So I'm glad he got a little bit of that, though, of just that banging on the walls all night prison horrificness. I was surprised. The first real question out of all this waiting was about Trent, the big-lipped gay dude that had come in. He just kind of looks like he's just an attention seeker, because Chris was like, I never hung out with him. But that was funny to me. Out of everything they wondered, they were like, is this Trent guy real? All right, so Chris sets up this whole I could never be myself around Shanann. And again, this goes into, I do feel like in this interview, Chris, minus the how he went from talking to Shanann to strangling her, I think it seems like this interview is pretty truthful. I still think that sequence of how they went from like, he's like, I crawled into bed with her and I was wearing my work clothes and I crawled on top of her and was straddling her and in my work clothes, and it was 4 in the morning, and we're talking for 15 minutes with me with me straddling her, and then all of a sudden, and that seems screwy to me, and it maybe is just Chris can't admit to himself that he just had it planned and just initiated the plan at that moment. But there's this whole thing the whole time is of just like I felt like I could never be myself, and around Shanann, and I part of me is Chris seems so childlike in a lot of this. He's like, I could never be myself around Shanann, and it's like, well, it's on you as a 32-year-old adult man to figure that out, Chris. You got to talk to your wife about it, or you got to talk to yourself and be like, you know what? Why aren't I being myself? What the hell? I'm an adult. I'm a dad. You know, it's like you got to pep talk yourself in that, and it's just like it was like I couldn't be myself, and therefore I just couldn't. Tells the story about how he pursued Shanann, and he's always in the stories that he tells about pursuing Shanann when she had health problems and had just gotten divorced and had just had like allegations of, I think her ex-boss had accused her of like laundering money. So she was going through a divorce and this thing with her boss, and she had all these health problems, and so she was in this very vulnerable. So in Chris's head, he always tells that story of like, yeah, like I came in and was her hero, and you know, she couldn't believe that I was okay with her health problems, and I let her sleep on my leg, and you know, and what it reads to me is here's Shanann in an extremely low, vulnerable spot in her life. And here comes Lizard Boy Chris just looking for, you know, he never had any girlfriends in high school, which I think is a red flag because he was pretty good looking in high school. You see that picture, that high school picture, it looks terrifying, and he looks like he has the eyes of Satan. But I mean, as far as like, you know, he wasn't like a little like undeveloped nerd boy in high school where it's like he hit his growth spurt in college and started hanging out with girls. This was, he just didn't really have any luck with girls, and I think that so Shanann is in this really vulnerable, really low, and I think people like Chris, whether they know it or not, are just looking for vulnerable people, almost to prey on. He's just kind of a predator in a way, and you know, and it just goes. So then he's telling that story more. Shanann made all the decisions, all the time, and I snapped. And again, this just goes back to, this is such just normal relationship stuff. It's almost like a David Lynch movie, because David Lynch loves to have the very like normal, very American, very like birds chirping, you know, people playing, and then like unbelievable murder and violence. And that's what I feel, that's how I feel when I listen to Chris talk about this whole thing, because he'll be like, he'll be like, yeah, she made all the decisions, and then I maybe I just couldn't. And it's like, this is normal. This is all very normal stuff until you get to the point where you killed her. See, he reads some of the stuff is just horrifying. How he has the children's book memorized and he reads it to his girl, like the pictures of his girls every night. It's like, God almighty, Chris. And then, so he's starting to talk about Nicole, and there's such this weird tone of like, I wish I would have just met Nicole at work and just left it like that. And it's like, yeah, but none of that had anything to do with, again, I think the point I'm trying to make is, in Chris's mind, I think that he thought that just this situation that I ended up in by all of these things was pushing him and leading him, basically pushing his hands slowly around his family's neck. And when really, if Tammy and Graham weren't trying to just keep him talking and just going, oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense, Chris. If it was like more of a police interrogation, I think they would have been like, what? Who cares if you would have just left her at work? That has nothing to do with you murdering your family. Many people have affairs and don't murder their family. That's not the issue. All right, let's keep it moving. He kept using the phrases like, this situation controlled me. And I think he really believes that. I really do. So we really are getting into what is truth at this point. Because if Chris Watts believes that, yep, it was just the situation, I just was in this soup of bad luck. My mom and Shanann hated each other because of the nut ice cream fight, and I was with Nicole, so I forgot I had a family, and I just wish the situation wouldn't have been like this. Everything was just barreling towards this murder, and like at one point he says if he would have just gone to the Bronco game, he insinuated that if he would have gone to the Bronco game with his friend instead of the Rockies game with Nicole, then maybe it wouldn't have happened. And it's just, I just kept being like, what, Chris? What does that have to do with anything? Just like, if I could have just gone to the Rockies game, then like maybe they'd be safe. And it's like, what? And yeah, I mean, it was tough. I think that the whole thing with the nuts in the ice cream fight, and then the way that was handled afterwards, I think I've said this in another video, but man, you gotta cut family a break. You really do. The fact that Shanann told Chris to not talk to his parents after that, and so when Chris got out there, Ronnie took the whole week off, and Chris or the kids didn't see him for that whole week. So I don't think that any of this leads to murder, and it's all on Chris. Chris, you don't get to say, like, Shanann posted on Facebook about the nuts, and therefore just the situation and the bad soup of crappiness just got me again. But I think you just got to cut family a break, you know? All right, let's keep it moving. All right, so this part of the story that still seems very just weird to me, and it feels like he goes back into the same kind of cadence of lying, and I could tell Graham and Tammy are still like, what? Is how it went from just talking at 4 a.m. to him, and I think to him killing her, and I think that Chris really doesn't want this to seem premeditated, because I think that if it's just a crime of passion and someone, all of this stuff happened to me. Shanann did this, my family did this, this was bad luck, all this happened to me, and I just, and I did it. And that probably makes it easier to sleep at night and just keep it going. Because how do you live in the concrete shitbox every single day? I mean, he's sitting in there right now. How do you live every single day knowing that this was just all you? Just you. There's no soup. You know, all the problems you have, we all have. And so, I don't know. So many things. I just had, yeah, and one thing I really didn't like is he was like, I stayed at Nikki's house all month, and for a month I had no reminders I had a family. I forgot. And so he's like, so? Yeah, and Graham and Tammy are like, oh, yeah, that does make sense, that just for a month, and then you murdered them. And then, all right, so then there's been a lot of discussion about premeditation or crime of passion, and I had kind of said that I disagree with Scott Reich that it was a crime of passion. He had said that because of the Dr. Phil info, that it had proved that what he had said, that Chris Watts hadn't planned it for years or months. And I agree 100% that he didn't plan it for years. I don't think Chris could plan something for years. But I also think that it was planned a little bit. And you know, they asked him about the phone call about going out to the job site alone, and he, in kind of his way, just was like, no, that's normal. I just did that for. But then he also said a lot of things like, it was already in the back of my mind, and maybe I didn't know it, but it was already in the back of my mind, and I was just going to do it. So this just goes back to, it's like, I think he might just have a lizard brain. You know? Because how can that be in the back of your mind? But it's like, I don't want to do it, but it's just in the back of my mind. I'm sorry it's in the back of my mind. So I think Chris thinks maybe even in his heart that this was a crime of passion, because it's too much for him to think that, yeah, this was already in my head that I was going to do this. And maybe that's why him on Shanann that morning, and how it goes from just they have sex, and then they go back to sleep, and then he wakes her up and crawls back into bed, and then gets on top of her even though she's pregnant, and then they talk for 15 to 20 minutes like that, which sounds weird, and then she's looking up at him and goes, you're never going to see the kids again, and then he goes down. And so I think that he awkwardly if it's true and he did get on top of her like that, I think that was his awkward way of just being like, well, here we go. And he's just delusional. That's another thought that I kept having during this, is he thinks he's a good guy. He thinks he's a good guy that just had this crazy bad luck, all these things that happened that moved him towards this. And he was talking about how Shanann didn't fight. And this is one of the most delusional things I've heard out of Chris's mouth the whole time we've been obsessed with him, is they're talking about how Shanann didn't fight. And, which is just so sad. She didn't fight, and they were like, well, what do you think that she was thinking while it was happening? And Lizard Boy says, I don't know. I read scripture. There's a scripture where there's like a prayer where you could say, I forgive them for they not know what they do, or I forgive him because he doesn't know what he's done. And he was like, maybe she was praying that while looking at me. It's like, yeah, I bet, Chris. I bet while you had your lizard hands around her neck, she was looking up and being like, forgive this guy, for he knows not what he does. And that's what I was not hoping for Bible Chris, is because now he has all these little lines that it's like, yeah, instead of just having to come to terms that I'm a complete failure of a man, I'm just going to, maybe she was praying to forgive me while I did it. I don't know. Yeah, and I guess just the last thing I had was there was this, just this could almost be described as a premeditated crime of passion, because he kept saying, like, I have it in my head, I had it in the back of my head, I knew I was going to do it, maybe I knew I was going to do it, and then it happened. So, I don't know. It was a strange listen. And I was really happy that they asked a lot of the questions that I was hoping they'd ask, like, what's the deal with calling Primrose, the school, that morning? And he said what I figured he would say, and he was just like, I don't know. I have no idea. I was scared. And we figured that the girls were alive all the way out there, which is just, it's that again. It's like, doesn't that make it not a crime of passion right there? Because he had 45 minutes to pull out of the whole kill the girls plan. He could have just, I don't know. People. I don't know. It's a weird listen. I think that we all probably ended that feeling strange, of like, it was good to hear there was some type of closure with it, but then it also just launched a million more questions of being like, what, Chris? What do you mean it was in the back of your head, but you weren't going to do it? You had already thought about it, but it was a crime of passion. And I don't know. But I think that's where I'm going to stop this show. I think I'll probably do another episode or two on just finishing up this interview. That was mostly on the first hour. But I do feel closure coming with this. And I'm going to get back to Stephanie and kind of keep that going. But anyway, thank you so much to everybody that has subscribed. And if you do want to support my channel, the link for Patreon is in the description. And yeah, love you all. Have a great weekend, everybody. True Crime Loser out. It's diving.